Steve Cuden.
Yes, sir.
Writer, director, producer.
Guilty.
I am in your presence today at your lovely home in Squirrel Hill. We've got some nice weather for this. You have really had a great deal of success in an arena that I think many people aspire to have success in, but aren't always successful. What do you attribute this to?
Are we talking about show business?
Yeah.
Are we talking about specific
that sordid business of show?
You know, people get into this business, and the only reason why they fail is because they stop. I shouldn't say the only reason, but one of the many reasons why they fail is because they just don't see it through. And I was doggedly determined. I still am for most of my life. It's in my blood. I can't expunge it from my system.
So perseverance pays. I think that's lesson one here.
Wow, perseverance is maybe 80% of it.
Well,
people sometimes get scared off by failure, and there's no way to succeed without it. You know, I believe it was George Bernard Shaw who said, a man who makes no mistakes makes nothing at all.
Yeah,
right?
I like that.
So you must fail in some way. You must try and fail, trial and error, try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. Or probably you're not going to succeed at all, because most people's first whatevers, their first efforts, their first draft, usually are not very good. Rare, almost impossible to know of a feature screenplay or a television show that somebody wrote, spat out of a computer, and it went into production right from there.
Although some of these movies I see, I would maybe assume that's how it happened. Yeah. Now, you wrote one of my favorite characters of all time, and that is Batman. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
That was just a great deal of fun. I got to write the second part of an episode that many people know of called the Batman Superman episode of the series called The Batman.
The Batman, yeah.
Because Batman has had a number of different animated series over time, and I worked on the series called The Batman, which was in the 2000s.
Yes.
You know, that was a dream come true for me, because as a kid I read a lot of Batman and Superman comics, and got to work on these characters that I've known and loved my whole life.
You became part of the mythology.
Well, from your mouth to whatever's ears.
I'll stick by that.
Okay.
I'll back that up.
And the other big superhero, well, I've worked on a number of big superhero shows, but the other one that's very much still in the zeitgeist is I worked on X-Men. So that was also a big thrill, because that's the whole other. That's, you know, Marvel and DC, those are the two.
You've got them all in your background. And in addition to that, also, you know, one of the most famous literary characters of all time, which is Dr. Jekyll. And we now shift to Broadway. You were responsible for the book for Jekyll and Hyde, the musical. I wrote
the original book and lyrics of the musical Jekyll and Hyde. Yeah.
It's popular. It's around.
Knock wood. It is... you know, it's been translated into close to 30 languages. It plays around the world all the time, and it's, you know, it's just luck. There's a lot of luck involved and a certain amount of determination and skill.
I imagine that getting something mounted on Broadway is a mammoth effort.
Well, I started working on it in 1980 with Frank Wildhorn.
Wow.
And we spent a very long time working on it before I was no longer involved in the project. I worked on it for about 9 years before being replaced by Leslie Burgh, who's a fairly well-known theater book writer, lyricist. And it took them another 9 years to get to Broadway. So 17 years from inception to Broadway is a pretty healthy length of time for a show to take. And shows what dogged determination and persistence and perseverance can do.
So, I mean, how did that start for you? Did you kind of just say one day, hey, you know, this would be great to music? Yeah.
Frank and I had been working together for several years prior to our starting work on Jekyll and Hyde. And the way that it simply worked was, at the time that we discovered that story, he and I were sitting there going, well, what are we going to work on now? Because we'd written a couple of shows that will never, ever see the light of day. And we thought there was this incredible show that had just opened like 18 months before called Sweeney Todd.
Oh, wow.
All right, so this was still a new show, and it was this dark, gothic, bloody horror show that nobody had ever really done anything quite like it before. I mean, there's always been dark, brooding shows, but not quite like this. And so we thought, well, what could we do that would be in a gothic or horror vein? And we actually sat there, this is in the beginning of 1980, and we looked at Dracula, we looked at Frankenstein, we looked at Phantom of the Opera 6 or 7 years before Andrew Lloyd Webber came out with his. We discussed that for a while. We looked at the Wolfman, and then we realized that this show, this novella, this Stevenson's novella of Dr. Jekyll, it's actually, the full title is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
It is strange.
It is strange.
Yeah.
But it's really two diary entries by people who knew Jekyll. It's not even Jekyll talking, and there's no real plot in this book. So we thought the interesting part is you've got one man who goes inside and becomes the bad version of himself,
right?
The split polar twin of himself, good and bad, good and evil. And we thought, isn't that an interesting potential to have a good girl and a bad girl, a good woman and a bad woman? So that is where you could contrive the romance, since there are no women in the book at all.
Right, and I think a lot of people forget that. We just kind of assume from all the iterations that have come out based on the original that that's how it went. But
correct. To have a musical, with rare exceptions, cries out for some form of romance.
Do you feel that's a rule? I mean, are there, if I was going to approach writing for Broadway, are there those things that you've just got to stick to get it produced?
In terms of Broadway specifically, Broadway today, because here we are sitting in 2014, and Broadway today is very much a commercial theatrical enterprise. And there are certain milestones that any writer is more or less obliged to hit. There are no rules. It's still an art form. But if you want to have somebody come along and spend 10, 12, 15, 20 or $1 million, or in the case of a Spider-Man, 70 or $80 million, then there needs to be something that hedges the bet in terms of bringing an audience in, that even if the show opens on Broadway and fails, still has a potential life after Broadway in terms of secondary markets, foreign releases, and so on. And those things include certain kind of character development, developing the plots of the stories such that audiences will want to see them all the way through.
Now, what's great is that you've written the book on this, literally, right?
Yes, sir.
Beating Broadway, Steve Cuden, right here. And I thank you for sending this. I'm fortunate enough to have an autographed copy by the author. I've really been enjoying this because I think there's a lot of great information in here about just writing in general, and then applying it to the stage. I mean, I think any writer can really benefit from what you've put down in here. The subtitle, how to create stories for musicals that get standing ovations, and I really like that.
I've been very fortunate. I've seen many performances of Jekyll under lots of different theaters, lots of different productions, and knock wood, good fortune, I've never not seen a standing ovation.
Wow. That's great.
That's exactly right. I was going to go back to this book for 2 seconds and to say that the really interesting thing to me, because I also teach screenwriting now.
At Point Park University.
That's correct. As well as I teach. I also teach musical theater in various other venues too. The commercial Broadway theater is as closely aligned, in my opinion, to motion picture screenwriting. The writing of a musical requires movie-like plotting.
Wow.
Even though you're inserting songs for emotion in various places. Where you spot songs is very, very critical in terms of writing a musical. But unlike certain plays, which can go wildly different than the way a movie would be written, because movies must move forward. Every single moment must move forward in a movie. Otherwise, the audience tends to get restless and bored. In a play, you can talk about the same topic for a very long time and go and never get off of it for a very long time. But a musical, like a screenplay or like a movie, must move forward constantly. But I think what came to me is to write a book about my understanding of the process, and then to take 40 shows, as I do in this book, 40 famous musicals, and break them down into their narrative beats and plot points, so a would-be writer can actually look at the book, at all these different famous shows, Hello Dolly, the producers, Phantom of the Opera, Jekyll and Hyde, and so on, and figure out, well, here's my show that I'm working on.
Right.
Well, did I do what these guys did? And the answer is yes, then they're probably in a good place. If not, not. If you're going to try and
beating Broadway, I want to give Broadway a black eye and some welts and maybe a cigar burn.
I think there are probably any number of people that would like to.
Well, I'm just picturing, you know, a learned and worldly fellow like yourself having to, you know, sit down and really trying to get into the head of Bugs Bunny. You know, it was playing recently at a community theater somewhere on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, and I really thought what would be fun for this interview would be to take you out to that show.
First Broadway production of it in 1997, there was a song called No One Knows Who I Am.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
And it was very strange the first time I heard that in the theater, and no one knew who I was.
Wow.
So it was a very interesting moment to go.
I will think of you whenever I hear that song from now on. But here I sit, you know, if I had a great idea for a Broadway show, I really would not know the first thing about how to get it, you know, done. I'd call you probably first, is what I'd do.